Instead of experiencing brain drain, which is we are experiencing in a huge way, we start experiencing brain gain.
China produces,
yes.
The US innovates,
yes.
and the EU regulates.
Demography informs democracy.
Expansion of BRICS, discussions from time to time about BRICS want to establish their own currency.
Yes. Out of every 10 people that you find anywhere in the globe, 4 of them, they are within the BRICS.
The concept known as industries without smokestacks.
So who are these academics that are coming up with this narrative?
The World Bank fears that the decade of 2015 to 2025 might be a lost decade. And the industrialization that people are expecting, it's actually going in reverse gear.
They don't participate in elections.
You have to replace something with something else. You cannot replace the dollar with nothing. And at the moment, their argument was, there is no challenger to the dollar.
But it will be very interesting if OPEC decides not to sell fuel using dollars.
Subsidizing consumption. It appears to be a much more logical thing because you are at the end of the chain.
The side that gets a haircut is the one for development budget.
You have to have a variable like fertilizer. We are not even going to talk about the fertilizer part of it.
I find the government saying this, but doing a different thing.
The international financial system, especially something like SWIFT, has never been weaponized. But this time it has been weaponized. Then nothing is no longer off the table.
So I think it was a wrong move by the US.
Kenyan shilling is depreciating. How will the Saudis and the Emiratis actually accept our shillings?
The dollar is denied the so much power that it has today. It will be to the advantage of Kenya and most developing countries.
There was a lot of doom and gloom prophesying about how the Russian economy was going to collapse.
What actually US froze until now they have not released is 3 times our GDP.
It took the dollar a lot of time to achieve the dominance and hegemonic status it got.
Our sovereign debt that is denominated in foreign currency would also reduce in value.
The global economy is still, people are addicted to the dollar.
Because the strength of any currency is dictated by its demand in the international trade.
And you tell the Chinese trader, let me give you renminbis. And they'll tell you, no, dollar. I want the dollar.
Most of the times we prefer to buy from multinationals, whether it is a food you would want to go to KFC.
The leaders might be a little bit at loggerheads, but Saudi Arabia and the US, they are still like 2 horses on a harness.
Though Russia is an outlier, you would that would not be the case for any African country.
Then if you combine all those 3 factors together, the dollar is still going to be king for, I don't know what, the next 40, 50 years.
Their contribution to the global GDP, they are above 30%.
Mexico now has much cheaper labor than China. And that's why also the concept of nearshoring is coming in. There is another point, I think we can tie this one to the issue of floods. That I wanted to touch on, the issue about subsidizing consumption versus subsidizing production. If you look at the situation that has happened in Kenya currently, there was like a shift with the new regime, and they were saying like we are no longer going to do the unga subsidies, for instance, and we will subsidize production instead. Now production, of course, many people argue there are a number of variables that have to come into play. You have most of our agriculture is rain-fed. So you have to depend on the rains. You have to have a variable like fertilizer. We are not even going to talk about the fertilizer part of it. And with the current situation, it's the planting season, but you have floods. So once again, our agriculture is rain-fed. It is also mostly open field. We are doing it in the open. And when the floods come, they affect a lot of those things. So in as much as an argument was made to subsidize production, but if all these other variables don't fall into place, the fertilizer, the rains, and even maybe the rains come but they destroy stuff. Can somebody argue in a weird way that subsidizing consumption, in as much as it can misallocate resources, etc., it appears to be a much more logical thing because you are at the end of the chain, and that let's say the past regime subsidizing unga in the final 6 months of the regime was maybe something that was much more practical than saying you'll subsidize production, but if all other variables don't fall into place, then you'll be like, the money that was put aside to subsidize production is not going to lead to anything.
That's true. And I don't know because when you say that, I find the government saying this, but doing a different thing. Because when they say they are subsidizing consumption, production. When they say they are doing more on production, on consumption.
The current one
is more on production. I doubt that whether they are actually subsidizing production. And the reason I say that is because you will find that. Out of like now the budget that you are working with, you are working with a budget of 3.6 trillion, and out of that 3.6 trillion, about 2.5 trillion was the expenditure by the national government. We have not included now the county governments. So the expenditure by the budget now of the national government is 2.5 trillion, the current year that we are in. Out of that 2.5 trillion, 1.8 trillion is for recurrent expenditure. Is for recurrent expenditure, 1.8 trillion. And the development activities or agenda is only left with the 700 billion.
700 billion.
Yes. So what does that mean? If you are subsidizing for production, it would mean that the development agenda or budget should be larger. And what happens every other time, like now the government is struggling to raise revenue, instead of eating on the recurrent expenditure, this 1.8 trillion, they reduce further this 700 billion, the budget for the national government, about 2.5 trillion. Out of that budget is divided into two: recurrent expenditure and the
development budget.
Expenditure. So for recurrent expenditure, we have 1.8 trillion, and recurrent it means we are paying salaries, and we are fueling the cars, we are doing repairs and maintenance for the government assets and all that. Only about 700 billion is allocated for development budget, which now would include ensuring that we enhance production. But actually, when the government is struggling to raise revenue to actually fund the entire budget, the side that gets a haircut is the one for development budget. So eventually, it is constrained up to about 500 billion. So when the government says that it is actually subsidizing for production, I feel it is not very true.
There is a mismatch between the rhetoric and the real action.
There is. Because recurrent expenditure, and recently the other day the government had this wage bill summit, the conference, where actually the president, and it is actually in the public domain, that 47% of the revenue that we collect goes to paying the wage bill. And this 47%, when it goes to wage bill, actually it is against the spirit of the constitution, because the constitution says that you should not spend less. You should not spend more than 35% on wage bill.
On wage bill.
Yes. So the government should try to really bring down that the wage bill to at least below 35%. But it will not be very easy because the government, and unless now there is that political goodwill that those in leadership, they are willing to really hurt their friends, which is not likely to happen.
Not likely to happen.
Yes, so it will remain to be a challenge we wait to see what happens.
Okay. Another topic that was a huge topic last year. Maybe this year it has went down a little bit. The topic of de-dollarization of the global economy, of African trade with other regions, and also tying that with the expansion of BRICS. And we've been hearing discussions from time to time about BRICS want to establish their own currency. And interestingly enough, I think the annual IMF and World Bank meetings in Washington 3 weeks ago, I saw a clip somewhere where I think the question was put to is it the finance minister or the central? I think the finance minister of South Africa, and it was laughed off. Because the idea was, anyway, if China, which is the biggest country of the BRICS, of course, and a global superpower in its own right at the moment, if one day they want to maybe replace the dollar with their currency, of course their currency is not there at the moment, the renminbi or the yuan. If they were to introduce a BRICS currency at the moment, then it will kind of act against their interests, let's say 10 years down the road. But there are those who believe that, BRICS currency could come in and maybe push the dollar a little bit. What's your take on all these de-dollarization debates? Is it hot air? Or do you think like it's something that can actually happen, let's say, maybe not necessarily, because some people are putting it as this is going to happen this year, next year. But let's say 10 years down the road.
I would say it is not hot air. And I have so much respect for the BRICS countries, because first of all, they comprise the 40% of the global population. When you talk about Brazil, you talk about China, you talk about Russia, India, South Africa. If
and the new countries that are going to join.
And the new countries that are going to join. Out of every 10 people that you find anywhere in the globe, 4 of them, they are within the BRICS. 4 of them are within the BRICS. So that is on the side of population. On the side of their contribution to the global GDP, they are above 30%.
31 or 32.
Which
is even much bigger than the G7 countries. G7 was contributing around 29%.
So you cannot ignore that kind of a trading bloc. And of course we are seeing China, Russia, the kind of ties that they are continuing to have is and also attracting other countries. And if for instance the dollar is denied the so much power that it has today, it will be to the advantage of Kenya and most developing countries. So even Kenya is really will be a beneficiary, because what would happen is the strength of the dollar would really come down, because the strength of any currency is dictated by its demand in the international trade. So if now we have even right now countries like Russia and China, they don't trade using dollars. Mostly they do using their local currencies. So that's actually now reducing the value of the dollar, the strength of the dollar. And you would see, if that was to happen in a prolonged period of time, you would see even the exchange rate between Kenyan currency and the dollar moving from where it is around 135 to even around 115 or even 110 thereabout. And what that would mean is that our sovereign debt that is denominated in foreign currency would also reduce in value. So
But I've watched videos of other economists. An example is Nouriel Roubini, I don't know if you know the name. And also Mohamed El Erian, of course from the US. And there was a summit, I think, last year, and they're also talking about this issue. And of course, both of them, for instance, agreed with the aspect that over time, the dollar will lose its dominance and its hegemony. But they were like, you always have to remember one thing. You have to replace something with something else. You cannot replace the dollar with nothing. And at the moment, their argument was, there is no challenger to the dollar. Like, if you look at the euro, not close. If you look at the ideal one would be if we have a global rivalry or competition between China and the US, then maybe the Chinese currency. But the renminbi, according to what I've heard, it's not even tradable. You cannot get it like the way you buy dollars. The other thing is the penchant for the Chinese government to devalue the renminbi. And so if you're looking at the usual roles of a currency, the first one is, let's say, an exchange, like a global, for the dollar, global currency for international trade. The other one will be like a store value, like you go and park in US Treasury bills and all those. You cannot do that with the renminbi or the yuan. And the third one will, let's say, be as a reserve currency. And if you look at that, then it appears that of those three major roles of the dollar, the one where other currencies have chipped in is the reserve currency. Because I think by last year, about 60% of all global reserves are in the dollar. But if you look at the trade, international trade,
yes.
I think it was still almost 90% is being done in the US dollar, even in countries like China. If you want to buy goods from Guangzhou or wherever, Beijing, Shanghai, you as a Kenyan trader, you'd go there and you tell the Chinese trader, let me give you renminbis. And they'll tell you, no, dollar.
Yes, dollar.
I want the dollar.
Yes.
So the argument was that in as much as the dollar's dominance will wane over time, at the moment, let's say in the next 10, 20, 30 years, there's literally no currency that can replace the dollar. And that's why their view was, you have to replace something with something else.
Yes.
But if you cannot replace it, because the argument was also, it took the dollar a lot of time to achieve the dominance and hegemonic status it got. So that it also means conversely that for its power to be chipped away, it won't just happen overnight.
Yes, true. But I don't think it took so much time for the dollar to get its dominance. Remember, we are talking about 1944. Before 1944, the country that was superpower was Britain. But it was involved it was involved heavily in the Second World War, and it borrowed heavily, and that's why it lost its dominance in terms of economy, the strength of the economy to the US. And the same time, in 1944, something happened that the then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually had an agreement with the then King of Saudi Arabia that if Saudi Arabia would agree to have the sale of fuel, petroleum, sold in form of in dollars, then US would protect Saudi Arabia. It would give them like the security in terms of in case of a war, they would always ensure that they are there for them. And that agreement was crafted. And since then, all the sales of fuel from all the OPEC countries has been happening in dollars. Yeah. So if that were to change, then we would see the strength of the dollar weakening, and we have started seeing that the US is not in the best relationship with Saudi Arabia. And you remember when the President Joe Biden actually flew to Saudi Arabia, and when he met MBS,
Mohammed bin Salman.
Yes, MBS. When he met him, instead of actually doing a handshake, he
did a fist bump.
Yeah, he did a fist bump, and that was MBS was not very happy at that because you remember there's a guy who was killed in one
Jamal Khashoggi.
Yeah. So
and of course Biden called MBS at the time a killer
and a pariah. So from that time they really
But don't you think their relation goes much deeper than that? I mean, they still do a lot of arms trading. They still do a lot of oil deals.
Yes.
So the leaders might be a little bit at loggerheads.
Yes.
But Saudi Arabia and the US, they are still like two horses on a harness.
That's for sure. But you see, other countries are also strengthening their weapon production industries. Russia, South Korea, North Korea. So anything is likely to change. In economics, we say that in the short run, everything is fixed, but in the long run, everything is flexible.
Everything is flexible.
Yeah.
Coming back to the US dollar,
yes,
and of course you can talk about 1944,
yes,
and then slightly at 1945 the Bretton Woods,
yes,
the two institutions that were founded.
Yes.
But a number of people also say that the dollar ran into problems, let's say in the 60s,
yes,
because of the gold standard.
Yes.
And the idea that I think for the French, the idea of they could always get for a certain amount of gold.
Yes.
A huge amount of dollars, and the US trade deficit was becoming much bigger.
Yes.
And that's why, for instance, I think in 1971,
Richard Nixon. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. They now said to hell with the gold standard,
yes,
and then the dollar standard came into being.
Yes.
And so the argument of the dollar did not reach where it was immediately.
Yes.
I think they tried to capture that period between 1944 and 1971. Like it took it maybe almost 30 years to rise to where it was, and then to assume that it will just go down the drain immediately. I think that's the point they're making, that to replace the dollar,
yes,
it might take time.
Replacing it may not happen very soon. Here, I would really focus on the weakening. The weakening
of the dollar.
Yeah, because you see, with the currently there's in Africa. We are pushing for Africa continental free trade
area.
Yeah, free trade area. So because what
as well as the Pan-African payment settlement scheme.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what we are doing, we are saying that most only 16. Actually, we want to increase the trade that African countries are doing amongst themselves, because intra-African trade. Currently it is at 16%, and we are comparing with like the European Union, where in Europe, where it is about 60%, in Asia about 55%. So, and you see in European Union, the international trade among those countries, it is happening using euros.
Yeah.
In China, in Asia, and China included, they are trying to limit the use of the dollar. So in Africa, if we come up with our own currency, because that's the intention of the African continental free trade area, then the use of the dollar. And remember, the strength of anything, it's about supply and demand.
Yeah.
When the demand of something reduces, even the value of that also reduces. That's why rocks are not very valuable, because they are everywhere compared to gold. Yes.
Or other minerals.
Yeah, exactly.
But people still argue that the global economy is still, people are addicted to the dollar. So that even if you introduce, let's say, the Pan-African payment settlement scheme,
yes,
like traders will simply tell you, or you are talking, the other point being mooted, being suggested was that let's use our own currencies. I mean, you can talk about, let's say, in Kenya, the G2G deal for importing fuel from the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And you are saying it's being paid in Kenya shillings. But then people are throwing a lot of shade on that. They're saying Kenyan shilling is depreciating. How will the Saudis and the Emiratis actually accept our shillings? But the point is, if, let's say, Kenya and wanted to trade with Botswana, and you as a trader here in Kenya, you want to tell a Botswanan person, hey, why don't we trade in Pula or in Kenya shilling? And the Botswanan will say, Kenya shilling? No, I want a dollar. I mean, there's that aspect of people, the global economy, and also in Asia and Latin America, all over the world, people still strongly addicted to the dollar, so that even if you bring in a replacement, a Pan-African currency, people will just say, no, I don't trust my fellow African. Their government, maybe their economy, their president, maybe they might play a game over us. They might pull the wool over our face. I want the dollar. So how will you actually change that mentality, let's say, in Africa?
It's very hard.
It's very hard.
That one is very hard, because I know you and me are also guilty in terms of even our spending here in Kenya. We most of the times we prefer to buy from multinationals, whether it is food you would want to go to KFC rather than a local restaurant that you are not very sure about the quality.
Exactly.
If it comes to fuel in the car, you will normally go to a multinational. So it is true that we are addicted to foreign I would say stuff, and we look down upon ourselves, which perhaps is where we really need to start changing the mindset and start actually appreciating ourselves for who we are. Because if you don't appreciate yourself, then no one will appreciate you for you. And that will be the game changer. The dollar is likely to continue to have dominance, because we don't trust our own.
But then also another point was being made about the dollar, and it involves SWIFT, as the international banking payments communication system transfers. And when the Russian war in Ukraine started, then that was one of the sanctions. They said if they continue doing that, we'll take them out of SWIFT. They actually took Russia out of SWIFT. And so the point was, in terms of geopolitics for many other countries, including China, they were like, before the international financial system, especially something like SWIFT, has never been weaponized. But this time it has been weaponized. Then nothing is no longer off the table. Like, if they can do that with SWIFT, and of course SWIFT is a major part of the global financial architecture.
That's for sure.
So there are people also argue if you look at SWIFT and you look at the role of the dollar globally, and then of course the role of the US in international financial institutions, especially the Bretton Woods. Then if you combine all those three factors together, the dollar is still going to be king for, I don't know what, the next 40, 50 years.
No. Like that one, actually, when they froze the amount of money that Russia had in the
all the assets in the West.
Yeah, actually, they were to a tune of 300 billion USD. 300 billion USD.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
That's equivalent. You know, our GDP is about 100 billion. USD. So what actually US froze until now they have not released is 3 times our GDP. The amount of money that the Russia had in those bank accounts held in Washington. So that's actually what put pressure on the need for BRICS to start being taken more seriously. Because China felt if Russia have suffered that, we as China we are likely to be punished in the same manner. The way they say something bad happens when good people keep quiet. That if we are 5 of us, I see you being attacked, I keep quiet because it is not me. The other person, I keep quiet because it is not me. Like that. So when it will be my turn, there will be no one there.
There's that poem, I think, from World War II. About the Jews and the Holocaust. And it was something like you kept quiet. They came for me. When they come for you, finally, after they've come for so many people, there'll be nobody left to speak out.
So I think it was a wrong move by the US because when they punished Russia in such a manner by what is called the weaponizing the dollar, is now when the need for BRICS to gain traction and to be empowered came into force.
I think it's almost like goes in the same direction. Because I think in 2019, French President Macron, for instance, when it comes to NATO, he'd said NATO was brain dead. And then Putin attacking Ukraine, then all of a sudden, even more countries in Europe, Sweden, Norway, they are joining NATO. So it's like he's brought NATO back to life. But in the other direction, it was like the weaponization of the dollar as well as SWIFT. Then other countries around the world, they're like, okay, let's now come and bond and become much more stronger. Not only the BRICS, but I think even the de-dollarization debate across the globe, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, all over, it has become much more pronounced after the weaponization of SWIFT. And that scenario where, okay, nothing, all bets are off.
So it's a matter of wait and see, and we cannot really say that the dollar will be
the king for the next 30 years.
Will be the king for the next 30 years.
Maybe for the next 10, in your opinion?
I would say 10 to 20 years.
10 to 20 years.
Because as you said, for a replacement to happen, a country must have a very vibrant securities exchange. And right now in China, that is not the case. That is not the case. So we still have a long way to go. But it will be very interesting if OPEC decides not to sell fuel using dollars, then that one would really mean a lot in strengthening another currency.
Fundamental change of circumstance that will affect the dollar greatly.
It would be. Because like here in Kenya, we import fuel to a tune of 600 billion in a year. 600 billion. It is our one most biggest
import bills.
Import items. Import items. It contributes to the highest to our import bill. So and it is the same for all African countries and any other country that does not produce its own fuel. Yes. So if that percent of the Kenyan importation bill or bills is 30% done using dollars because of that agreement that happened between the US president in 1944 and if that changes, then the dollar would weaken substantially.
But it's also strange because once again, coming to the case of Russia, there was a lot of doom and gloom prophesying about how the Russian economy was going to collapse and how being taken out of SWIFT and even their central bank reserves in the West being frozen all across. And that the economy will contract by almost a third and stuff like that. But strangely enough, the economy has been quite resilient. In fact, I think the IMF projected this year they'll grow by about 3.5%. Which for such an economy, for an industrialized economy, is a lot.
It's a lot.
But of course, some people are saying it's more on the war economy, like the war industries are booming and everything, creation of weapons. And so that one is making the economy grow much, slightly, even much better than many countries in the West. Yeah. So some people are saying, maybe the SWIFT is not, it's not that powerful per se. Like you can circumvent it. And of course, if you have people you can trade with, because China has continued saying, hey, we'll continue trading with Russia. India, interestingly enough, has been sitting in the fence, but they also insisted that they'll continue selling, buying Russian oil, or I think oil mostly.
For sure.
So many other countries are continuing to say, hey, we are continuing. And as long as it's like you have a reliable trade partner, then even being frozen out of SWIFT apparently does not appear to be hurting your economy that much as people expected.
Though Russia is an outlier, you would that would not be the case for any African country, because remember, Russia.
Of course, Russia is a great power still.
Yes,
I mean its power has waned, but it's still a big player.
And it was also supported by the OPEC countries, the oil producing and exporting countries, because
it's a member of OPEC. Actually.
Yes, when the US actually said that the oil from Russia should not access, no other countries
should be sanctioned.
Yes, should be sanctioned, basically. Actually, what happened, instead of OPEC countries increasing their oil production and the supply that they are taking to the market, they reduced. So they reduced. So actually, that actually made room for the Russian oil to become more valuable and more sought after. And that's when countries like China and India, they continue to say, if Russia, they are giving us oil at a favorable rate, why not purchase from them? After all, it is our economy, not the US economy. So, but if that was not the case, if the OPEC countries had decided to increase their oil production and supply so that they can bridge the gap for the Russian oil that has been sanctioned, then Russian economy would have suffered a huge blow. But now being a member of OPEC, the rest, they said, it is now our time to also to cash in.
It's like it's cushioned them. It's provided a very nice buffer.
Yes. If it were the other way around, or if Russia was not very strong in that oil market, and it was a normal African country,
African countries,
it would have felt.
We would have felt the wrath of being blocked out of SWIFT.
Yes.
Or let's say having sanctions against using the dollar or something of the sort. All right, so Dr. Kamau, I think we've been having a very interesting discussion.
Very interesting indeed.
Maybe to wind things down,
there
is one other economic concept I wanted to discuss with you shortly.
Okay.
The concept known as industries without smokestacks. It's a new concept that has been coming up, I think, 2018, 2019. There's a book that was published back then. And the idea is that tying that to a report by the World Bank last year, the African Pulse report, I think in October 2023, the World Bank noted that some of the major economies in Africa, I think Kenya was among them, Nigeria, South Africa, it appears that they are de-industrializing, that the contribution of the manufacturing sector in these countries has gone down if you compare, let's say, with 2010
or
2015. And so the World Bank fears that the decade of 2015 to 2025 might be a lost decade. And the industrialization that people are expecting, it's actually going in reverse gear. And so tying that to the industries without smokestacks, the idea that the services economy, the services sector can be a replacement because, of course, it produces more jobs than manufacturing, and that African countries, developing countries, can proceed ahead while using this system because manufacturing appears not to be working. What's your take on industries without smokestacks? Some people believe it's hot air. Like for you to industrialize, you need the manufacturing sector. Plain and simple.
Maybe not. I would have a different view because when we talk about the Asian tigers, something like Singapore, they are very heavy in service industry, and if at all they do manufacturing, it is not as much. So that is their strength. The way we started by saying that it's good that a country operates within where they are best endowed by resources, by nature with resources and all that. So in Africa, I would say we would do very well in terms of going through the manufacturing because we are a resource-based region or a continent, a resource-based continent. And maybe when someone is popularizing or coming up with that narrative, maybe that person or that organization would be to really take advantage of Africa.
I think it's actually academics.
Yes.
A couple of academics are coming up with the idea
that
manufacturing doesn't seem to be working 50, 60 years down the road.
Yes.
Maybe you can talk about big data, big digital companies.
Yes.
You can also talk about tourism, hospitality.
Yes.
Because of course they produce more jobs than manufacturing. Let's say if you compare one to one.
Yes.
But the idea is if manufacturing isn't working, maybe these countries could industrialize through the IWOSS.
It's very again you started the narrative about the three credit rating agencies. That they probably they are coming up with a very funny narrative that would eventually be to the disadvantage of African countries. When we talk about countries that heavily invest in research and development, African countries are not among them. When it talks about people who dominate the academics, Africans are not there. So who are these academics that are coming up with this narrative?
Of course in the West.
Of course the West.
They're from the West.
So basically it would be a narrative to discourage Africans from doing value addition to their resources and continue to import them to abroad when they are in their raw form. So that would be a very wrong strategy to follow for African countries, because if we are heavily endowed with the physical resources, with the minerals, the land is very arable, then someone comes with a narrative that we should not do manufacturing, we should continue to export in raw form. I think it's not a very it's not a good
or rather maybe they're not saying that directly, but they're saying maybe you should, the same thing you are talking about, comparative advantage.
Yes.
Maybe your strengths lie in the services sector.
The reason, one of the strengths that African as a continent we have is that our population is young. Our population is young,
very youthful,
very youthful, very energetic, and
almost everywhere else in the world. The pyramid is inverted. Is inverted,
and actually that's the main reason why you said it very well, that production happens in China.
The phrase somebody used on that TV channel was they produce in China. China produces. The US innovates. And the EU regulates.
Where do you think China produces? Is because of the population.
The huge population, the huge workforce.
The huge workforce. The labor cost is very low. In Africa, labor cost.
Even though some people are saying China is going to have a population collapse maybe by 2050. I mean their population, because of the one-child policy and everything, by 2050 might be very difficult for them.
But when they are collapsing, you see the GDP per capita for Chinese, it has improved significantly. Significantly.
And also the fact that maybe their labor costs have been rising.
Their production cost will also rise.
Someone was saying something like Mexico now has much cheaper labor than China. And that's why also the concept of nearshoring is coming in against the old concept of offshoring. A lot of things were going to China, and many even companies in the West right now, they're talking about China plus one, C plus one, C plus two. They're like, okay, the situation in China is getting a little bit toxic or difficult. So they're coming back to countries close to China like Vietnam or some of the other countries.
Exactly. That's what should now African leaders should not be pushing for that. Focusing on manufacturing, what should happen is the reason why China developed is because the multinationals from Europe, from US, they saw that there was cheap labor available in China. So they went and set up factories there. So right now the place with the cheapest labor is in Africa. So that's what African leaders should be pushing for those multinationals to come and set up their factories here, so that instead of experiencing brain drain, which is we are experiencing in a huge way, we start experiencing brain gain. And once now those deep technocrats or those expatriates come here in Kenya to do the production, we also learn from them. So, and by doing so, we would also increase the productivity of African at large, as opposed to going through another strategy where we are not gifted at. We cannot compete with Singapore, with Hong Kong. We cannot compete with Akina Malaysia.
Even Vietnam. Vietnam is attracting a lot of FDI.
Yes.
With the China C+1, C+2 strategy.
Yes. So basically, I would really advocate that we and actually Kenya is doing that. President, one of his agenda items is to ensure that the contribution of the manufacturing sector here in Kenya moves from 7% to at least 20% by the year 2027. So that Kenya, we are not
and also there's the vision 20 by 30.
Yes,
20% by the year 2030.
That's for sure.
The World Bank report, of course, was saying that I think in 2008 or 2009, the manufacturing sector in Kenya was about 12% or 13%.
Exactly.
So it's gone backwards, and in major African economies, it appears to be going backwards.
Yes.
Which is why, back to Einstein.
Yes.
Doing the same thing.
Yes.
And getting the same, expecting a different result.
Yes, that's madness. That's pure madness. It's pure madness.
Okay, Dr. Kamau, I think maybe I'll give you the final word.
Yes.
What do you think where the Kenyan economy is going?
Yes.
Where Africa is going? Issues like debt distress, do you think like in the next, maybe until 2030, will the situation get better for African countries? What is your outlook? Let's say over the next 6 years.
Over the next 6 years.
In Kenya, but also like in the region and in Africa.
Yes. I think not even over the next 6 years or 10 years or 50 years. If we don't change our mindset, nothing will change, even if we wait here for 1,000 years. So the most important thing is for us to change, and change starts like the former president used to say about that time of COVID, that security starts with you, that you first protect yourself from being infected from COVID. So what I mean is that demography informs democracy, because the demography is the characteristic of the population. If we don't enhance our characteristic to become better, we will continue having bad leaders, and these bad leaders are the ones that dictate what is democracy. So that's why I'm saying demography informs democracy. So first of all, we have to change for everything to change. And if we change, then even within the next 3 years, things are likely to start looking up, and we see that positive change, and everything becoming better. But even if we don't change, even if it is in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the way you said very well, that in 1971, the countries that were LDCs were about 23. Currently in Africa alone,
25,
currently in Africa alone, 36.
Then things are going the other direction.
Yes, things don't get better with age, but things get better with the personal improvement or personal development. And as a country, when now we keep changing from the most basic unit, which is yourself and myself,
the individual.
Then the demography will change, and the demography will inform a democracy. Because I tell you, don't participate in elections. Because people will say,
interesting.
People will keep saying that it's better the thief that we know. It's better, all that kind of narrative. And you can really say that your perception you will not carry the day. So I hope that we change. And so that if we change, things will change. If we don't change, nothing will change.
Someone can argue to change things, you have to go to the ballot.
You have to go to the ballot.
Change is on the ballot.
Change is on the ballot. I know that, and that's a discussion.
We
can have another day.
2 hours for another day.
Yes.
Dr. Alex Kamau.
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming to the podcast.
Yes.
And I think it has been a really fruitful discussion.
Thank you.
I hope it has also been fruitful on your end.
It has been.
Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day, and hopefully we'll get to see each other some other time.
And thank you very much, Pius, for having me.
Okay.
It was an insightful conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.